The sound of shuffling papers drifted through the heating vent above my head as I sat in my study, supposedly napping in my leather recliner. At 78, people expect you to doze off at odd hours, and I'd learned to use that assumption to my advantage. My son Davison's voice carried clearly through the old house's ventilation system, along with words that turned my blood to ice. "The insulin overdose will look completely natural," he said, his tone as casual as discussing weekend plans. "Dad's been diabetic for 15 years. Everyone knows how easy it is for elderly people to get confused about dosages." My hands gripped the armrests of Eleanor's old chair, the one she'd insisted I keep after her funeral 3 years ago. The fabric still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, but now it felt like I was clinging to a life preserver in stormy seas. "How much longer do we have to keep up this charade?" That was Vivian, my daughter-in-law, her voice sharp with impatience. "Playing the devoted family is exhausting, and I'm tired of pretending to care about his boring stories." Davison's laugh was cold enough to freeze summer air. "Just until we get the new will signed. Once he transfers everything into the family trust tomorrow night, we can accelerate the timeline. The lawyers said the trust structure makes it impossible to contest, even if someone gets suspicious." "What about cousin Millicent?" Vivian asked. "She's been sniffing around, asking too many questions about his finances." "That meddlesome old biddy won't be a problem much longer," Davison replied. "Once Dad's gone, we'll have her committed to that state facility for dementia-related delusions." Problem solved. The room seemed to tilt around me. Millicent Ashworth, my late wife's cousin and my closest confidant since Eleanor's death, was also in danger. These monsters weren't just planning to murder me, they were orchestrating the destruction of anyone who might stand in their way. "The life insurance alone is worth $800,000, Vivian continued, plus the house, investments and pension benefits. "We're talking about nearly $3 million total. More than enough to pay off our debts and start fresh in Costa Rica," Davison agreed. "Dad always said family should stick together. He just never realized he'd be sticking to us permanently." Their laughter echoed through the vents like the sound of vultures circling carrion. I sat there in Eleanor's chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, and felt something I hadn't experienced since my army days in Korea: the cold, calculating fury of a man pushed beyond his breaking point. They thought they were dealing with a confused, dependent old man who'd quietly shuffle off to his grave when convenient. But they'd forgotten something crucial about men of my generation. We'd survived the Depression, fought wars and built lives from nothing. We understood that when civilization's veneer gets stripped away, only the strongest and smartest survive. They had no idea what a lifetime of survival teaches you. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished. My name is Bartholomew Ashworth, though most folks have called me Bart for the better part of 8 decades. At 78 years old, I've seen enough of life to know that the deepest cuts come from those closest to your heart. But even with all my experience reading people, a skill honed through 43 years as a small-town bank manager, I never imagined my own son would become my executioner. The story begins, as most tragedies do, with good intentions and misplaced trust. When my beloved wife Eleanor passed away 3 years ago after a courageous battle with cancer, I felt like half my soul had been torn away. We'd been married 54 years, and every corner of our Victorian home in Millfield held memories of our life together. The silence where her laughter used to ring felt overwhelming, and the empty spaces where her belongings once sat seemed to mock my loneliness. That's when my son Davison and his wife Vivian stepped forward with what appeared to be genuine compassion. "Dad, you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house all alone," Davison had said, his arm around my shoulders as we stood in Eleanor's prize-winning rose garden. "Let us move in and help you. We're family and family takes care of each other." At the time, their offer felt like an answer to prayer. Davison was 46, a former insurance adjuster who'd been struggling to find steady work since the industry downturn. Vivian worked sporadically as a dental hygienist, but they'd been living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment across town, accumulating credit card debt and complaining constantly about their financial pressures. The house was certainly large enough to accommodate them. Built in 1889, it featured 5 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, a library, a formal dining room, and sat on 4 manicured acres in the heart of Millfield's historic district. Eleanor and I had spent decades restoring it to its original grandeur, and it was now valued at approximately $1.2 million. My financial situation was comfortable, though not extravagant. 43 years at Millfield Community Bank had provided a solid pension, and prudent investments over the decades had grown into a respectable portfolio worth about $900,000. Eleanor's life insurance had paid off the mortgage, and my monthly income from Social Security and pension benefits totaled just over $8,000. More than adequate for a man with simple tastes and no debt. More importantly, my health was reasonably good. Yes, I had type 2 diabetes requiring daily insulin injections, and my arthritis made winter mornings challenging, but my mind remained sharp as a tack. 43 years of analyzing loan applications and assessing people's financial credibility had taught me to notice details others missed and to trust my instincts about human nature. Those instincts would prove invaluable in the months ahead. Initially, having Davison and Vivian in the house brought unexpected warmth back into my daily routine. Vivian would prepare elaborate meals, insisting I relax in the parlor while she handled the cooking. "You've worked hard your whole life, Dad," she'd say sweetly. "Let us pamper you for a change." Davison seemed genuinely interested in helping with household maintenance and financial management. "Dad, you've got a lot of complex investments and insurance policies," he'd observe while examining my financial documents. "Why don't you let me help organize everything? I know the insurance business inside and out." I appreciated their apparent concern and gradually began allowing them more involvement in my affairs. It felt good to have family nearby, especially during the difficult anniversary dates when Eleanor's absence felt most acute. But I wasn't entirely alone even before they moved in. Eleanor's cousin Millicent Ashworth lived just 6 blocks away in a charming cottage she'd inherited from her mother. At 75, Millicent was a force of nature, a retired school principal who'd raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband died young, earned her master's degree in her 50s, and spent 30 years molding young minds with a combination of firmness and compassion that had made her a legend in local education circles. Millicent had been Eleanor's closest friend and confidant, and after the funeral she'd naturally stepped into the role of my informal guardian angel. Every Tuesday and Friday she'd arrive for coffee and conversation, bringing homemade biscuits and the latest community news. We'd sit in the sunroom overlooking Eleanor's garden, discussing everything from local politics to our shared passion for Civil War history. Millicent possessed an uncanny ability to see through people's facades, a skill developed through decades of dealing with adolescents, demanding parents and bureaucratic administrators. Nothing escaped her sharp hazel eyes or her analytical mind. "Bartholomew," she said one Friday afternoon about 6 weeks after Davison and Vivian moved in, "have you noticed how they hover around you?" I was puzzled by her observation. "Hover how?" "Like carrion birds waiting for something to die. The way they watch your every move, listen to your phone conversations, ask detailed questions about your doctor appointments." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "It reminds me of how my nephew's wife acted before she convinced him to put his father in a nursing home and sell his property." I dismissed her concerns with a wave of my hand. "Millicent, they're just worried about my health. It's natural for family to be protective after what happened to Eleanor." But Millicent's words planted a seed of awareness that would grow into full-blown suspicion over the following weeks. I began noticing subtle changes in their behavior and my environment. Vivian had taken over managing my medications, claiming her medical background made her more qualified to ensure I took the right doses at the right times. "We can't have you accidentally double-dosing or forgetting important medications," she'd explained while organizing my pills into one of those weekly dispensers. But I'd been managing my diabetes and blood pressure medications perfectly well for years. I developed a routine, created reminders, and never once had problems with dosing. Yet now they insisted on complete control over my medical care. Davison had convinced me to add him to my bank accounts for emergency purposes, and had gradually taken over paying bills and managing correspondence. "This way you don't have to worry about due dates or keeping track of all those different companies," he'd said. "I'll handle the boring stuff and you can focus on enjoying your retirement." But the arrangement meant I was losing awareness of my own financial situation. Bank statements were now sent to Davison's email address instead of coming to the house in paper form. When I asked to review the monthly summaries, he'd provide brief verbal updates rather than showing me the actual documents. They were also systematically isolating me from my support network. "Dad, you really shouldn't be bothering Millicent so much," Vivian mentioned one evening after my cousin's regular Friday visit. "She's getting up there in years and elderly people can become paranoid and suspicious. We don't want her filling your head with conspiracy theories." When my old friend Harrison Polk called to invite me to our monthly chess tournament at the community center, Davison intercepted the call. "Sorry, Harry, but Dad's been having some balance issues lately. His doctor doesn't want him driving at night until his next checkup." I hadn't been having balance issues. In fact, I'd passed my most recent physical examination with flying colors, and Dr. Brennan had specifically commented on my stability and coordination. The financial manipulation escalated gradually but persistently. Vivian suggested converting my traditional paper bills to electronic statements for environmental reasons, which meant all my financial correspondence now went through their email accounts. Davison recommended streamlining my investment portfolio by consolidating accounts and updating beneficiary information for tax efficiency. Each change seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they were creating a web of financial control that was slowly but surely removing me from oversight of my own assets. The first major red flag came during a routine appointment with Dr. Brennan, my physician of 22 years. "Bartholomew, I need to discuss some concerning reports I've received about your mental state," he said, reviewing my chart with a furrowed brow. "Your son called last week expressing serious worry about memory lapses, confusion episodes, and difficulty managing daily tasks." I was stunned. "Doctor, I haven't been experiencing any of those symptoms." "Who told you that?" Dr. Brennan looked uncomfortable. Davison seemed quite distressed. "He mentioned you'd been forgetting to take medications, getting lost during routine drives, and having trouble recognizing familiar neighbors." None of those things were true. I drove the same routes I'd been taking for decades. I knew every resident on our street and most people in town by name. My memory was as sharp as it had ever been. "Doctor," I said carefully, "I think there's been a serious miscommunication. I'm feeling fine mentally and physically." He studied me intently for several minutes, asking detailed questions about current events, my daily routine, and recent activities. Finally, he made a note in my chart and looked up with concern. "Bartholomew, if someone is trying to have you declared mentally incompetent for financial reasons, that constitutes elder abuse. It's a serious criminal offense." Those words hit me like a lightning strike. Mental incompetency declarations. Financial control. Elder abuse. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were beginning to fall into place. Dr. Brennan spent an extra 30 minutes conducting cognitive assessments and memory tests. I scored perfectly on every evaluation, demonstrating complete mental acuity and awareness. "I'm going to document today's examination very thoroughly," he said, "and I'm required by law to report suspected elder abuse to the appropriate authorities. Do you feel safe in your current living situation?" I assured him I felt safe, but requested copies of all my medical records and test results. "I want to keep my own files," I explained. That night, I lay in the four-poster bed Eleanor and I had shared for over 50 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of what I was discovering. The medical lies. The financial control. The isolation tactics. The systematic undermining of my independence and credibility. This wasn't family caregiving. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to position themselves as my legal guardians while discrediting me as mentally incompetent. But I needed more information before taking action. And I needed an ally I could trust completely. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked to Millicent's house without informing Davison and Vivian of my destination. "Millicent," I said, settling into her familiar kitchen with its sunny yellow walls and herb garden visible through the window, "I think you were right about them. And I think the situation is far worse than either of us imagined." Her eyes immediately sharpened with concern. "Tell me everything." I recounted Dr. Brennan's revelations about the false medical reports, the gradual financial control, and the isolation tactics. Millicent listened without interruption, occasionally nodding with grim recognition. "Bartholomew," she said when I finished, "they're not just planning to steal from you. They're implementing a guardianship fraud scheme. It's becoming increasingly common as a way to exploit elderly people with assets." "How does it work?" "First, they establish a pattern of documented mental decline through false medical reports and testimony from complicit family members. Then they petition the court for guardianship, claiming you're no longer capable of managing your affairs. Once they have legal guardianship, they control everything, your finances, your medical decisions, even where you live." The implications were staggering. "And there's no way to fight it?" "Not if they've built a convincing case file of mental incompetency. The court system tends to err on the side of protection, especially when family members present united testimony about an elderly person's declining capabilities." We spent the morning developing a counter-strategy. Millicent suggested I begin documenting everything, every conversation, every lie, every attempt at manipulation. She provided me with a small digital voice recorder her granddaughter had given her for recording family stories. "Keep this with you at all times," she instructed. "Record every interaction that seems suspicious. We need evidence." She also recommended I start photographing important documents before they could be altered, and keeping copies in secure locations outside the house. Use the safe deposit box at the bank, she suggested. And give me copies of everything for safekeeping. For the next month, I became a meticulous intelligence gatherer. I recorded conversations, photographed documents, and maintained detailed written logs of every suspicious incident. The picture that emerged was even more damning than I'd feared. They weren't just planning simple theft. They were orchestrating a complete legal takeover of my life. The recorded conversations revealed their timeline and methodology. Vivian had been in contact with a lawyer who specialized in elder guardianship cases, someone with a reputation for aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. The plan was to have me declared incompetent within 6 months, giving them complete legal control over my $3 million estate. But the most chilling discovery came when I found correspondence hidden in Vivian's dresser drawer. While they were out shopping one afternoon, I conducted a careful search of their belongings. Hidden beneath Vivian's lingerie was a manila folder containing documents that made my blood run cold. Inside were copies of death certificates for 3 elderly men, all wealthy widowers who had died under suspicious circumstances over the past 5 years. Each had been married to women who bore striking resemblances to Vivian, though the names were different. The life insurance payouts totaled over $2 million. My son had married a serial killer. But there was more. Bank records showed that all the insurance money had been spent within 2 years of each payout. They'd burned through millions of dollars on luxury purchases, failed business ventures, and high-stakes gambling. They were broke again, and I was their next target. The folder also contained detailed research about insulin overdoses, including medical articles about how excess insulin could cause fatal hypoglycemic episodes that would appear completely natural in elderly diabetics. They'd been planning my murder for months. I photographed every document, then carefully returned them to their hiding place. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the camera, not from fear but from rage at the scope of their betrayal. That evening I called Millicent and shared my discoveries. Her response was immediate and fierce. "Bartholomew, we're calling the police tonight." "Not yet," I said. "I want to catch them in the act. I want evidence so comprehensive that no lawyer can twist it, no judge can dismiss it, and no jury can ignore it. That's extremely dangerous. If they're planning to murder you with insulin, then I'll be ready for them. But I want them to reveal everything, their complete methodology, their escape plan, their entire criminal network. These people have killed before and they'll kill again unless we stop them permanently." Millicent was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" "Help me prepare for what might be my final performance. And if something goes wrong, make sure the truth comes out." Over the next 2 weeks, I began implementing a complex deception. I started acting more confused and dependent, complaining about memory lapses that didn't exist and asking for help with tasks I could easily handle myself. I wanted Davison and Vivian to believe their gaslighting campaign was succeeding. "Dad seems to be declining faster lately," I overheard Vivian tell someone during a phone conversation. "We might need to consider memory care soon." I also began subtly testing their criminal knowledge and intentions. During dinner conversations, I'd mention concerns about my will and estate planning, watching their reactions carefully. Their eyes would light up with barely concealed greed whenever I discussed asset transfers or beneficiary changes. "Dad, have you thought about updating your will recently?" Davison asked one evening, his tone carefully casual. "It's been several years since Mom died, and your circumstances have changed significantly." "I suppose I should," I replied, feigning uncertainty. "But all that legal language confuses me. Maybe you could help me understand what needs to be changed." The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to spring it. 3 days later, while supposedly napping in my study, I overheard the conversation that confirmed my worst fears. They were planning to kill me within 48 hours. And I was ready for them. I sat in Eleanor's chair for nearly an hour after their conversation ended, letting their words replay in my mind while I finalized my counterplan. They thought they were dealing with a confused, helpless old man, but they'd underestimated their opponent in every possible way. First, they'd assumed I was technologically incompetent. But 43 years in banking had required me to adapt to computer systems, electronic transfers, and digital record-keeping. I'd spent the past month installing hidden cameras throughout the house and setting up secure cloud storage for all evidence. Second, they'd assumed I was socially isolated. But 7 decades of community involvement had built me a network of relationships they couldn't even imagine. Former banking colleagues, longtime church members, civic organization friends, people who'd known me for decades and would never question my mental competency. Third, they'd assumed I was physically helpless. While I wasn't as strong or quick as I'd been in my prime, I still had the strategic thinking skills that had made me successful in business and the survival instincts honed during 2 years of army service in Korea. Finally, they'd assumed I was emotionally vulnerable due to grief and loneliness. But Eleanor's death, while devastating, had also freed me from the fear of loss. When you've already lost the most important thing in your life, you gain a kind of fearless clarity about what really matters. That evening, as we sat down for what they intended to be my last supper, I was fully prepared for their final gambit. Vivian had prepared an elaborate meal, pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The dining room was set with Eleanor's finest china and crystal, as if they were celebrating a special occasion. Which, in their minds, they were. "Dad, you seem tired tonight," Davison observed as Vivian served the meal. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just a bit worn down," I replied, playing my role perfectly. "These last few months have been challenging, trying to keep track of everything." "That's exactly what we've been worried about," Vivian said, her tone dripping with false concern. "We think it might be time to simplify your financial affairs. Make everything easier to manage." They spent dinner gradually steering the conversation toward estate planning and asset transfers. I played along, expressing confusion about legal terminology and gratitude for their guidance. "Dad," Davison said as Vivian cleared the dinner plates, "we've actually prepared some documents that would make everything much simpler. Just basic paperwork to streamline your accounts and update your beneficiaries." He produced a thick folder of legal documents from the sideboard, papers I'd seen him working on for weeks. The heading on the top page read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement and Power of Attorney." "This looks complicated," I said, squinting at the dense legal language. "Maybe I should have my attorney review it first." "Dad, your attorney is 86 years old and barely practicing anymore," Vivian said quickly. "We've already had everything reviewed by a specialist. It's all standard language." But I'd already had Millicent's son-in-law, a practicing attorney, review similar documents I'd found earlier. The trust agreement would transfer complete control of all my assets to Davison and Vivian, while the power of attorney would give them authority over my medical and financial decisions. Signing these papers would effectively make me their property. "I suppose if you've had it reviewed," I said hesitantly, reaching for the pen Davison offered. That's when Vivian brought out my evening insulin injection. For 3 months, she'd been handling my diabetes medication, preparing the syringe and administering the injection herself. "It's easier for me to get the dosage exactly right," she'd always claimed. But tonight, I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she prepared the injection. The syringe seemed to contain more liquid than usual. "Actually," I said, setting down the pen, "I think I'd like to wait until tomorrow to sign these papers. I want to read through everything one more time when my mind is clearer." Davison's face darkened. "Dad, the lawyers need these documents first thing Monday morning for filing. If we wait, it could delay everything for weeks." "Then maybe we should delay," I said mildly. "These are important decisions and I don't want to rush." Vivian moved closer with the syringe. "Dad, you need your insulin. Your blood sugar levels have been erratic lately." I looked at the syringe, knowing it contained enough insulin to kill me within hours. My blood sugar would plummet, I'd go into diabetic coma, and they'd call 911 reporting a tragic accident with my medication. "You know what?" I said, standing up slowly. "I think I'll skip the insulin tonight. I'm feeling a bit nauseous and I'd rather wait until morning." "That's not safe," Vivian insisted, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "Diabetics can't skip insulin doses. It could be dangerous." "What's dangerous," said a new voice from the dining room doorway, "is trying to murder someone with an insulin overdose." Millicent stepped into the room, followed by 2 police officers and Detective Raymond Hayes, whom I'd known since he was a teenager working summers at the bank. Davison and Vivian froze like deer caught in headlights. "Mr. Ashworth," Detective Hayes said, "we've reviewed the evidence you and Mrs. Ashworth provided. We have warrants for the arrest of Davison Ashworth and Vivian Ashworth on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and attempted murder." "There's been a mistake," Davison started to protest, but his words died as I pulled out the digital recorder I'd been carrying. "The insulin overdose will look completely natural," I played back his own voice from earlier that day. "Dad's been diabetic for 15 years. Everyone knows how easy it is for elderly people to get confused about dosages." Vivian dropped the syringe, the contents spilling across Eleanor's Persian rug. "You were supposed to be napping," she whispered. "I was listening," I replied. "Something I've been doing for 3 months while you planned my murder." Detective Hayes carefully collected the syringe and its contents for testing. The forensics lab would later confirm it contained enough insulin to kill a horse, much less a 78-year-old man. As they handcuffed Davison and Vivian, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness at the depth of their betrayal. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and walked down the aisle at his wedding. But justice was more important than sentiment. "Dad," Davison said as the officers led him toward the door, "you don't understand. We were trying to protect you." "From what?" I interrupted. "From living? From keeping the assets I worked 70 years to accumulate? From having the dignity to die of natural causes?" He had no answer. As the police cars pulled away, Millicent and I stood in the foyer of the house Eleanor and I had filled with 54 years of memories. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since the day I found the death certificates in Vivian's dresser. I knew then that confronting them directly would just make them more careful. I needed them to reveal everything." "Weren't you afraid?" I considered her question seriously. "No. When you've already lost the most important person in your life, you realize that dying isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Living as someone else's victim, that would have been worse." The next morning I called my real attorney, not the elderly man Davison had referenced, but Harrison Polk's daughter Sarah, a sharp criminal lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. "Mr. Ashworth," she said after reviewing all my evidence, "this is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've ever seen. Your documentation is extraordinary." "I had a good teacher," I said, thinking of Eleanor's methodical approach to record-keeping. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. The FBI became involved when they discovered Vivian's pattern of marrying and murdering wealthy elderly men across multiple states. She'd used different identities, but the methodology was always the same: present herself as a caring younger woman, isolate her victims from family and friends, gain financial control, then stage their deaths to appear natural. Davison had been her latest recruit, lured by debt and greed into becoming an accomplice to multiple murders. They'd also uncovered a network of corrupt professionals who'd been facilitating these crimes. Lawyers who specialized in fraudulent guardianship proceedings, doctors who would falsify medical records, and financial advisors who helped launder the stolen assets. The trial became a landmark case in elder abuse prosecution. I testified for 3 days, my voice strong and clear as I described their methods and motivations. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Vivian received life without parole for 4 counts of murder and multiple fraud charges. Davison got 40 years for conspiracy, elder abuse, and attempted murder. Their criminal network collapsed as investigators followed the evidence trail across 6 states, resulting in 23 additional arrests and convictions. But the real victory came afterward. I used my experience and the settlement from their criminal asset forfeiture to establish the Eleanor Ashworth Foundation for Elder Protection. The foundation provides resources for seniors to recognize abuse, legal assistance for victims, and training for law enforcement and medical professionals on these types of crimes. Millicent became my co-director, bringing her educational background and administrative skills to help develop prevention programs for vulnerable elderly people. We've helped expose 17 similar schemes in the past 18 months, saving dozens of elderly people from financial ruin or death. The foundation also lobbied for stronger elder protection laws, including mandatory reporting requirements for suspicious financial transactions involving elderly clients and enhanced penalties for guardianship fraud. I still live in the house Eleanor and I restored together, but now it's truly my sanctuary. I have genuine friends, authentic community connections, and the deep satisfaction of knowing I not only survived my family's betrayal but transformed that experience into protection for others. The dining room where they tried to murder me has been converted into the Foundation's conference room. Where Davison and Vivian once plotted my death, we now plan strategies to save lives. My diabetes medication is once again managed by me alone, stored in a locked box that only I can access. Every injection reminds me of how close I came to becoming their victim and how many other elderly people might not be as fortunate. Millicent stops by most evenings, and we discuss Foundation business over tea in the sunroom overlooking Eleanor's restored rose garden. The garden blooms more beautifully now than it ever did during Eleanor's lifetime, perhaps because I tend it with the knowledge of how precious and fragile beauty can be. I learned that family isn't defined by blood or legal relationships. Real family consists of people who protect you, support you, and love you without expecting anything in return except the same respect and care. Davison and Vivian saw me as a disposable obstacle between them and money. My chosen family, Millicent, Dr. Brennan, Detective Hayes, and the community members who rallied around me, saw me as Bartholomew Ashworth, a man with value, wisdom, and the strength to fight back against those who would prey on the vulnerable. At 78, I've discovered that life's greatest purposes often emerge from its deepest betrayals. Every day brings new opportunities to help other seniors, to share my story, and to prove that age doesn't make you helpless. It makes you experienced in ways that can be dangerous to those who underestimate you. The foundation has become my legacy, more meaningful than any material inheritance I might have left behind. We've trained over 300 law enforcement officers in elder abuse recognition, helped pass legislation in 12 states strengthening elder protection laws, and provided direct assistance to more than 400 elderly abuse victims. Sometimes, late at night when the house settles and creaks, I sit in Eleanor's chair and imagine what she'd think of how I've spent these years since her death. I believe she'd be proud that I turned our home into a place of protection rather than a crime scene, and that I used her memory to fuel justice rather than just grief. The most profound revenge isn't what I took from them, it's what I built from their betrayal. A network of protection and education that will outlive us all, touching lives they'll never know about and preventing tragedies they'll never understand. Every elderly person who recognizes the warning signs because of our educational programs, every family member who reports suspicious behavior because of our awareness campaigns, every law enforcement officer who properly investigates elder abuse because of our training, they're all part of Eleanor's living memorial and my lasting victory over those who tried to destroy me. In the end, they gave me something more valuable than they ever could have stolen. They gave me a purpose worthy of the years Eleanor and I had together, and a mission that honors the love she brought to my life. Because the most dangerous opponent isn't the strongest or the fastest. It's the one who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. And sometimes, the greatest victories are won not by defeating your enemies, but by building something so strong and meaningful that their defeat becomes irrelevant. They thought a lifetime of survival had made me weak and vulnerable. Instead, it had prepared me for the fight of my life, not just for my own survival, but for the protection of every elderly person who might face similar predators. At 78, I finally understood what Eleanor meant when she used to say, "Bartholomew, we're not just living for ourselves. We're living for all the people we can help along the way." Now I live for both of us and for every vulnerable senior who deserves to age with dignity, safety, and respect. Have you ever noticed signs of elder abuse in your community? Do you know the warning signs? Financial exploitation, isolation from family and friends, sudden changes in legal documents, or unexplained health decline. What would you do if you suspected an elderly person was being systematically abused or exploited? Elder abuse affects nearly 1 in 10 seniors, but it's vastly underreported because victims are often ashamed, isolated, or threatened into silence. If you suspect abuse, report it to your local adult protective services or law enforcement immediately. You could save someone's life. Remember to check on elderly neighbors, relatives, or community members who might be vulnerable. A simple phone call or visit could make the difference between safety and tragedy. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and subscribe for your daily dose of chilling revenge tales where justice always finds a way to triumph over evil.